Welcome back to Camus Classics. As you saw from our Hurricane Easter car show video, we had a project coming up with Matt's Off-Road Recovery. Now that his videos have dropped, we're able to talk about that a little bit. It was kind of a little bit of a secret, what was going on. But anyways, we're able to talk about that now. So we're going to talk about that and what our role in that was. Okay, so look what I found. Matt here at Hurricane Easter Car Show. We do have an upcoming project.
That's right. We're going to be working together on something pretty epic. It's going to be all over my channel. Probably going to see it here on Cooper's channel too.
So we got a call from Matt's Off-Road Recovery about a 4-man YouTube versus 4-man Gladiators of Steel Demolition Derby. Our role in that is we've been building, I started derbying in about 2003. Built cars. I finally retired in 2013 from running in them, but I still helped. A lot of my family still ran cars, so I still helped building them. A lot of knowledge in mainly GM cars is what I mainly ran. Cadillacs, Buicks, Oldsmobiles. That's what I mainly ran. So our role was being a information on how to build the car to make it the strongest. So several times talked to Matt on various things. We got a call. So what he needed most help with was building the car strong to make it last. And because we had a lot of experience in the GM cars and he was running a GM wagon, he reached out to us on how to build things. So if you watch his build video, you'll see a lot of the stuff that me and him talked about happening. For example, the all thread up through the roof of the car, the way he did his bumper shock mount on the front end. I wasn't able to see how he leafed his car, but we talked about that. There was a lot of stuff we talked about on how to build that car. So that's what our part of the collaboration was helping him to build the strongest car possible. If you watch their videos, you'll see Team YouTube 1. Way to go, guys. So if you've watched Matt, Paul's videos, you kind of, they all seem to have an origin story. So here's our origin story of how we got involved with those guys. So like I said, I retired in about 2013 from driving. I still was building cars. There was a popular demolition derby forum website where demolition derby drivers throughout the nation got on there. Shared tips and tricks, had sold cars to each other. Promoters was able to go on there and promote their shows, as well as just some general discussion between the derby family. Derbying is a family. You'll see that if you ever see that one of us is in trouble. For example, when Robbie's shop burned down, the derby community came together and helped him to rebuild his shop. And that's just the way the derby community is. So I was perusing that website one day and come across the Washington County Fair. There was a post on there about that fair, and like I said, I was just getting out of it. As far as driving, I still wanted to be around the community, so I kind of moved over towards inspecting. I did a little bit of that while I was active, and so I come across the Washington County Fair, and the first year Matt was with the Washington County Fair, there was another guy that had been in charge before, and you got on this website and there was a lot of comments about the way things happened, the way payouts occurred, just general. It wasn't real great, but there was this guy on there, went by the name Corvair Junkie, and he said, I'm going to be the promoter next year. What do you guys want to see? And immediately, to me, you could tell this was a guy that actually cared about the community, cared about the Derby, wanted to see it continue, wanted to put everything he had into it. There's a lot of promoters. Some are in for it money, it's their business. Some are in it just because they didn't like the guy that was running it before, or they don't like the other promoters, so we want to do things our way. But this was a guy you could tell genuinely cared. So I reached out to him. We had a house down there I could stay at, and so I reached out to him, and he didn't know me, I didn't know him, and said, hey, would you like some help? I've been doing it for 10 years now. I've inspected cars, I've been on the promotion side. I can see you really actually want to make things better. So if you want, I'd be more than happy to help you. He jumped on that. So the first video you've seen with me with Matt, when he says I was his mentor, this is where that's coming from. So we talked a few times via chat messages, text message and stuff. Probably called each other once or twice. Never met the guy. Show up 2 or 3 days before the Derby. Took the whole week off, went down for the Derby. Granted, I'm here in northern Utah. If we get 85 degrees where I live, that's hot. Get down there to southern Utah and it's 105 to 110. Horrible weather for me. It's just hot, it's not comfortable. But here's this guy, and he was running a business. He has his own business. At the time he had Red Ryder Towing. This was way before winter towing. Had Red Ryder Towing, and he basically stopped his business for that week. Still sent guys when he could, but if he couldn't, he had to use a lot of his employees at the time they either were running in the Derby or he needed them assisting him. So I contacted him, and I think we met like on a Thursday night. He said, come over Thursday night around 9 o'clock, because that's when it's starting to finally cool down. Still over 100, but he says, come over, we're going to have an officials meeting. He brought in all his timers and everybody that was helping. He had done a little bit with derbying. Other than that, I was really the only other one that had much experience in the derby world at all. Most of these were his family friends. And so we kind of went over what counts as a hit for the timers, what the ones that were going to be arena officials, what they're watching for, driver's door hits, somebody that appears injured, fires, things of that nature, what the arena officials are looking for. And that was the first time I'd ever met the guy. Larger than life, he's ready to do it. He's interested, and he's energized to do it. Great to work with. Friday night they had figure eight. They call it figure eight racing. They put 2 tires in the middle of the arena, and the cars, mini cars, compact cars, cars of today, I guess you could call it. Not the big old cars. They race around these tires in a figure eight pattern. A lot of crashes and stuff as they go around the tires, and pit maneuvers, and T-bone collisions in the middle. Hadn't really been around that, but Matt understood that pretty well, so we let him run that night. It was all him. I was there just to watch, make sure, kind of do my official responsibilities, but that was it. Saturday rolls around, and we start inspecting the cars. That was my primary job, was inspecting the cars, looking for safety mainly, and cheating. So the big one was safety. The first year I started, we've got batteries with seat belts holding them in, with zip screws holding the seat belt down. We've got plastic fuel tanks. It was really a safety nightmare for most of the cars. So there was probably 75% of the cars were first time, or that was the only show they ran, I should say rookie type drivers, whereas the other 25% were what you'd consider more professional. They run multiple shows a year, multiple cars a year. They're really into it, and they build good quality stuff. Those guys, you had to worry about their cars for cheating. You didn't have to worry about the safety stuff. The other cars, it was mainly safety. They didn't cheat enough to even worry about it. They didn't even do the base stuff enough to worry about cheating. So we get going. Things go pretty well. We have the biggest complaint that he had the year before was checks. So most derbies you go to, checks are handed out at the end of the night. So that was his number one priority for that year, was to get the checks so that he could hand them out that night. And he did that. He accomplished that goal. He worked very well with the fair board. And so he had the checks. The problem is, every other show that's handing out checks, they have somebody to write the checks. What he had was he had already pre-filled out checks. So first place paid so much, second place paid so much. So he had those checks, which is fine until you run into a tie issue. So this is how I meet Paul Cox. I'd heard the name. I'd never met Paul, never met Michelle, never met any of the people that was at that derby. There were two people I did know, and the only reason I knew them was we had bought cars from them. So we had maybe been with them half hour, 45 minutes. Didn't really know them. We just bought cars from them. So Paul's running his truck. I'd heard Paul's name before because there was a group out of Montana that was doing they call it the hit of the year. And so people were filming the derbies, and whoever, if you were a driver and you felt you made a good hit, you would submit it. So I don't know if he won every year he submitted, but at least the year before, Paul had won the hit of the year contest in his truck. And I believe it was his truck. It could have been a car. I believe it was his truck though. Paul won the hit of the year contest. So I recognized the name, and it was a good hit. Come to find out, a lot of Paul's hits are really good hits that he could have submitted several different hits and probably still won the contest. So here's what happens. Paul's in there driving his truck. It comes down to the last two. One of them was one of the guys I knew, just because we'd bought a car from him. That was part of the reason I was there, was I couldn't really have any favoritism because I didn't know anybody. And so Paul's truck is still screaming, running good, not really damaged. The other guy's truck's struggling. Paul's, you can tell, is on the hunt, racing around the track, trying to find the last running truck. There was him and this other truck. and the other guy was kind of doing a pretty good job at hiding between the other trucks away from him. Well, the guy in the other truck that's not Paul, he times a hit perfectly. Now, it's a little controversial. So his bumper ends up over Paul's front tire, so it's pretty much a side shot. Paul was trying to turn into it, hadn't quite got enough to where we could call it turned into it. Well, when that other truck hit, he was stuck on his tire. They couldn't break apart. The other guy's truck was struggling, and he says, I won. We're trying to say, hey, let's pull it apart. Nope, I won. My truck's not running good. I won. And so we have no choice but to call it for the other truck. Paul hadn't turned enough into that truck to make it a combined hit. And as I said earlier, we ran into a check problem. We didn't have a way to split the money. We had a check for first place, we had a check for second place. We didn't have a check that we could write for each one, so we kind of had to make the call. We had to have a winner, we couldn't have a tie. The other guy's saying, my truck's done. And he made, I'm going to say 95% of the last hit. Paul probably did make 5%. So could we have called it a mutual hit? Yes. But we were in this sticky check situation. And because the hit was way more to the other guy, we had to give him the thing. We couldn't call it, break them apart, because he says, I made the last hit. I don't want to be broke apart. We would have loved to, because they were putting on a show. It was a great show up until that point. So one thing that I told Matt when we started, as he said, I was kind of his mentor, was for at least the next 2 days, do not get on that website. Because people get on there to complain. And that was the brunt of the comments, was people complaining that this didn't go my way, or that didn't go my way, or you could have made this call. As officials, it's very hard. Like I said, myself and Matt were the only ones that really had any experience. And so the rest of our officials on the outside, they could watch for things, but they weren't the best at it. They were good, but they weren't the best at it. And it's just because they didn't have that experience. They didn't really know 100% what they were looking for. And so they did a good job. But you miss a driver's door hit, or somebody wants a driver's door hit called when 80% of the car happened on a fender and they barely touched the door. Things like that. But people complain. So I told Matt, stay away from that for a few days. And what you'll see, and that's really interesting, is you'll see people complain, and then you see other people that was, and anybody could sign up for an account on this website. So what you kind of seen was, you would see a bunch of complaints, which was typically family and friends, but then you would see the drivers come in. And that's where I told Matt we needed to focus, was about a couple days later, because the next day drivers are sore, they're tired, especially when they've been thrashing on a car all night. They're not getting on there on the next day, and then the next day after that, they're back to work, and they still have a few things, they're still not ready. But along about Tuesday, derbies usually in Utah happen on Saturday. About Tuesday, you start getting the drivers on there, and they're saying, typically, most of them are thanking the promoter, giving some great suggestions on improvement, but they're not really complaining so much about the officiating of the Derby. So I told Matt, stay off. But what happens is we make the call in the arena, And here's Paul's family and friends. Once we made the call, you could tell Paul was really pissed off. He was mad. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He was upset. And, you know, rightfully so. He had the better truck. He ended up second place. But he did. He had the better truck. He had the best equipment. It was running well. On paper, he should have won that hands down. But like I said, the hit was enough that we had to call it one way. And it was probably not 90 to 95% the other driver made the hit versus 5 to 10% Paul making the hit. So we had to make that call, unfortunately. So you could tell Paul was upset. Didn't want to talk to anybody. And we just kind of had to let him go. Family and friends are chewing us out. How we should have pulled them apart, kept it going. We should have called it a mutual hit and a tie and flipped for the trophy and split the money, and but it was one of those, we couldn't split the money, and we had to make the official call. So, having officiated many, many derbies, you're always going to get chewed out. I've been chewed out so many times. So that was my first experience with Paul and Michelle. Long about Thanksgiving time frame, I had talked to Matt, and I was headed down there for Thanksgiving, and I said, why don't we meet and go over some rule changes? And yeah, that'd be great. Let's do that. And so, without telling me, he just tells me what time to be to his house. I knew where his house was because we had to go there to get some stuff. He doesn't tell me we're going to Orderville, to Paul's house, or Glendale. I think he's Glendale. Over that area anyway. He doesn't tell me we're going to Paul's house. So I go to Matt's house. We load up in the truck. He's like, we're going to go get some dinner. And so we go to get some pizza and start taking off out towards Colorado City to go around the pink coral sand dunes up that way. That's when he tells me we're going to Paul's house. Now, my last experience wasn't great. I had basically been reamed up one side down to the other. And so I'm like, okay. He's like, no, it's all good. I went to their derby the week afterwards and we talked about it and everything's all good. And I'm like, okay, if you say so, I'm good to go. So we get to Paul's house and something happens that has never happened before and never happened since when I was doing derby officiating. I received an apology for the way things had been handled. They still didn't necessarily agree with it, but they did apologize for chewing us out, which was great. That's kind of when I got to know Paul and Michelle a little bit more, and they're just great people. Both Matt and Jamie, Paul and Michelle, salt of the earth people. They're going to do what they can for their community. Many of you see on Matt's channel and Paul's channel, that they give back to their communities and help out where they can. And a lot of you may think it's because they are making a lot of money off of YouTube or their businesses, and so they're able to do that, and that's the only reason they're doing it. I can guarantee you, my experience before that, they were doing that before. The only thing the money changes on that is how much more they can help. Great people. So that's kind of my origin story of how I met Matt and Paul and Michelle through the derby community. Okay, so how did I get to know Robbie Layton? This goes back again to Matt and Paul. So I'm from northern Utah, they're southern Utah. I've been derbying around northern Utah. I knew a lot of the promoters. Utah has always kind of been divided into 3 derby areas. You had southern Utah, central Utah, northern Utah. Northern Utah always kind of followed similar rules. Central Utah was similar rules. Southern Utah was similar rules. But they were different enough that you couldn't take a car from a northern Utah show to a southern Utah show and be able to compete. They were just different enough. And so here's Paul, here's Matt, they're driving trucks. Well, every promoter that was using trucks, other than 1 year at one derby, were just filler heat. So it was an opportunity to allow those that made it to the finals championship round. It was allow them time to get their cars ready, cut around, metal around tires so the tires move freely. As stuff bends, you have to worry about that sort of thing. If you had something break, weld it back together, fix the engine if you broke a distributor cap or something and you need to fix that. It was basically time for those little things that you could get fixed so you could make it back to the main event. So trucks were kind of a filler heat to allow for that time. Well, all of the promoters that were running trucks were running different rules. But it wasn't, and they were similar enough that you could take a truck from one show to the other, but this show would maybe not allow something, another show would allow it. And so there had been numerous attempts in cars to get similar rules. The goal actually would be to have a unified one set of rules for all the shows, and then you could just run wherever you wanted. Never could happen because you could not get the promoters on the same page. The biggest promoters in the state was, yeah, we can all have the same rules as long as they're our rules. You had others that were drivers that were now promoting that were saying, well, we don't like this portions of your rules, so we don't want to have everybody have those rules. We like to do this different or this different, and it just was a major pain. You could basically you build a car for a promoter. Well, trucks was a little bit different. They were similar enough, yet there were things that people wanted to do to their trucks that would pass half the shows but wouldn't pass half of the others. So it was, you could have different bumpers on different trucks at different shows and different ways they wanted things done. And so it was always take the truck, you may have to cut this or that, or you now want to run this truck at this show, well, it allows certain things else, so now you have to add those to the truck. Well, if you don't destroy the truck, then you got to cut those back out to run to the next show. And so Paul and Matt kind of talked me into talking to the Northern Utah promoters, seeing if we couldn't schedule a meeting between the bigger promoters. We kind of had a lot of the smaller promoters who was doing 1 or 2 shows. They basically just said, hey, yeah, go ahead. We wanted to do it for trucks. Have one unified set of truck rules for the entire state. So I talked to a lot of the promoters, and they talked to promoters they knew, and we basically had a consensus of, hey, you guys write the rules, get everybody else on board. The 1 or 2 show guys, we'll just run whatever you guys come up with. That's fine with us. So, I reach out to the bigger promoters that I knew in the Northern Utah, and we meet up. One of the nastiest storms I've ever driven in, but we decided to meet in kind of central Utah, north central Utah, if you ask Paul and Matt. About a 4-hour drive for them, about an hour and a half for me, about an hour and a half for the other 2 promoters that were coming. So definitely much further from them, but they wanted this so badly they were willing to do that. So we met at a restaurant and start hashing out what we're trying to do. We kind of get the consensus, yeah, go ahead and write the rules. So we write the rules. One of the promoters reaches out to me and says, okay, if you're writing these rules, we want you to come to and inspect trucks for us. We don't need you to do any of their cars. We have our full crew for that, but we don't really have anybody that knows trucks. And now, you know, Matt's got me on this truck kick, so now I'm the truck inspector for this other promoter. Go to a show, inspect the trucks. Don't really have to do anything else. It's great, wonderful. I can't remember if Robbie was at that show or not, but they had a big show, draws a lot of cars in. It was on the 4th of July, and they were not doing trucks at that show, but they did have some of their regular officials that were driving in the show or were out of town. So they asked me if I wouldn't fill in on that show. So I go to this show, and you know, there was only 2 shows that year they were doing trucks. Then they had me come for this one on the 4th of July. And we get there, they assign all of their inspectors a part of the car to look for. Now all of their inspectors have been inspecting cars for years. They know what they're doing. So they had their main inspectors, head inspector. They were underneath the car. My job was passenger compartment, making sure, you know, the cage was right. There's nothing illegal in the cage or any of that, because they have rules, you know, specifying inches of how close this can be to this and how close that can be to that and what size this can be and all of that. And so it's a lot of, basically you have to have measuring tape to inspect a car. It's not great, but it works. Making sure that they had seat belts in there, that they had a good metal battery box that was capable of holding it. They only had 1 battery because the rules only allowed for 1 battery, even though several tried to use 2. Because a lot of the Derby cars at that time were not running alternators, so having 2 batteries allowed you to run a little bit longer. And you know, making sure the gas tank's good, that you know, anywhere the fuel line goes through a firewall or is a narrow sharp thing, it's protected, covered. That's what I was in charge of. And then I was the arena official as well. So I'm there doing that, and one of the heats, there's this crazy car. I'm just going, LS engine. This car is just going nuts. I don't think he ever hit the brake. I think the throttle pedal was pinned to the floor, possibly even wired to the floor, because it never, till the engine gave out, it never stopped being full throttle. And so as an official, I mean, you're watching this car, because if that car's coming towards you, you know, we use Jersey barricades, the cement barricades. They'll tip over. Typically, a car won't go over them. I have seen it a few times where the car will go over them, usually if there's another car assisting. This car was enough that if he hit one of those, it would probably tip it over and then go over it. Just going crazy. I'm like, never heard of this guy, this Robbie Layton guy. Who is he? I've never seen him. Heard him. So, you know, watching him, you know, making sure if he's coming my way that I'm getting away from the barrier so that he doesn't hit me. And, you know, that's one of the big things. We had a couple officials pass away because of that they didn't get out of the way and got run over. Very sad times. And so we were very adamant of watching that for our own protection. And so the heat ends, and his car's not very far, I don't believe, from where I was at. And he climbs out, and I'm like, when did we start allowing 12-year-olds to drive in the Derby? Robbie just has such a young face. He was probably mid to late 20s at the time, but he has such a young face that I'm thinking, you know, why did we let 12-year-olds drive in the Derby? But, you know, I know he was mid to late 20s probably when this happened. And so the Derby ends, and, you know, we were inspecting. We got done inspecting around 2 or 3 o'clock. They had fed us a little quick lunch, so we'd be ready. And then they have a barbecue, smoking barbecue guy that was at the show, and he does an end of year he would do an end of year banquet for them, and then he was feeding us that night after we got all the cars out of the arena and things kind of gathered up. Then, you know, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, we're going to have barbecue at the fairgrounds. And, you know, just basically the officials, well, here comes this little kid. It's Robbie. He's coming to join us for the barbecue, and, you know, pretty funny and entertaining guy. So that was my first introduction to Robbie Layton. Like I said, I never ran against him. I basically retired by the time he started running more, and so that's my Robbie Layton story. You know, the 12-year-old driving the Derby car. Just kidding, Robbie, we know you're old enough, but you gotta admit, you do look young. So this is our Derby origin story, how I met these guys, and want to just say congratulations, Team YouTube. Oh, Rudy. So I did help Rudy as well with several of his questions on his car. Both of them were running cars that I had helped build. So I kind of knew the ins and outs, where they're going to fold, where they're going to bend. And so I was able to help both Rudy and Matt out. But I want to say congratulations, Team YouTube. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.